Welcome back to the NutraSave podcast, episode 13. Real excited to do it with y'all. Just me today. Should be the last one without Joey, as by the time you guys are watching this, he will have graduated from Marine Corps boot camp down at Paris Island. So thank you guys for all of your thoughts and prayers, helping him get through it. I will be down there for his graduation, so I'm real excited to go see him. So yeah, real good times coming up for the podcast. We're super excited to have him back on. Back talking sports, especially as hockey is getting ready to start back up here in about a month. College football is getting ready to get into the thick of it with conference play. So, yeah, we're super excited to have Joey back. But kind of getting into the meat of this episode, we're going to be talking about college football. Week 2, there were some massive games and some real telling games of how we're going to see some of these teams. I think we kind of saw what Oregon's going to be able to do this year. South Carolina has given us a very different image of what they can do compared to what we saw in week 1 against Old Dominion. Notre Dame lost to NIU out of nowhere. Lost a couple million for that one too. And Arkansas has given us a buttload of offense through 2 games. It has been impressive and not something that we saw happening under the Sam Pittman era in Fayetteville. So kind of getting right into it, I think the game of the week this past week was Texas and Michigan, one of the most anticipated games, defending national champion Michigan, hosting Texas in the Big House. College game day there, and watching game day leading up to the game, everyone was like, Michigan's going to keep it close. There's no way Texas runs away with this. I think everyone had picked, or everyone had said something along those lines of there's no way Texas blows Michigan out. Texas did just that. Texas ran the table on Michigan. Quinn Ewers went 24 for 36 for 246 yards and 3 touchdowns. And that Michigan defense just did not look like it could stop anything. It's not the defense that we saw when they won the national championship, given they lost a lot of pieces. They lost a lot of pieces on offense too. And that was one of the biggest questions we saw coming into the game with Texas was, what was this Michigan offense going to be able to do? Against Fresno State, they were only able to put up 30 points. Given Fresno State's a sneaky good group of 5 team, but still, the defending national champion coming off in a week 1 game, coming off of 30 points, and then a massive game against Texas and what could have been a possible college football playoff matchup in the bracket down the road. I think we just saw quite possibly Michigan's burial for the CFP. I don't think after that loss, and if that is what we're going to see from Michigan moving forward, I don't think there's any way we can see them in the college football playoff. They still have 3-4 games that they easily could lose. Still left on their schedule, Southern Cal, Oregon, and Ohio State. I think this year is the year Ohio State finally gets Michigan back for the past 3 years. I mean, what Ohio State has loaded up with and kind of really paved their way for their team, I don't know if there's any way Michigan can compete with that. I mean, what we saw from them these past 2 weeks, and not scoring a touchdown against Ohio State is not going to be acceptable. You're going to have to figure out how to work out this offense with Davis Warren, how to work in Alex Orji, because Orji, when he came in the game against Texas, it was pretty much just run plays. When he came in the game, Texas was able to load the box and Michigan was able to do nothing. And so you've got to figure out how to work Orji into the pass game. You got to get Davis Warren to figure out what he's doing. This Michigan offense needs to be more productive. If they cannot become more productive, this Michigan team may have an 8-4 ceiling, is going to miss the college football playoff, is going to miss the Big Ten championship game. And so a massive fall off from what expectations were entering the season and what really a defending national champion should do defending their title, and especially with the expectation being set so high with what we've seen from Alabama in the past decade, what we've seen from Georgia in these past 5 years. There's really been a standard of excellence, and Michigan has been far from it these first 2 weeks. So again, I think they host Oregon in the Big House. And so I think that if Michigan loses to Oregon, I think Michigan's college football playoff hopes are out the window. I think their the Big Ten championship hopes out the window. And entering the season, I was saying it before over the summer, I thought that the Big Ten championship game was going to be Ohio State and Oregon. We're going to get that matchup. And Oregon, we'll get to that in a little bit. But they haven't shown us necessarily what we would expect the championship caliber team to be. So the Big Ten, it's looking iffy. And with Texas, not I wouldn't even say Texas is the best team in the SEC. I think Georgia's up there, but with Michigan being one of the premier teams in the SEC or the Big Ten, competing against Texas and getting blown out, I have concerns for how the Big Ten is going to fare overall. And I think that when it comes to the college football playoff, you're gonna really only have and from what we've seen with Oregon, you're really gonna only have Ohio State that's gonna be able to compete with a Georgia, a Texas, a Missouri. Um, so seeing that there, I think it's time to start sounding the alarm. We saw Bowling Green almost pull off the upset in Happy Valley. That was given their two garbage touchdowns scored at the end to kind of get a little bit of separation in there. But Penn State needs to figure out kind of how to play defense. That was, I think, a big problem. Was I think their play action defense struggled a little bit against Bowling Green. They had some questionable spots in other areas, but then their offense too, in certain times wasn't able to kind of gel, but then other times, they're able to rip off some massive plays. So there's just been a kind of roller coaster up and down inconsistency that we've seen with Penn State. So if they want to be able to go and represent the Big Ten, even getting an at-large bid, they're going to have to play significantly better. I don't think Penn State's necessarily got as hard of a schedule going throughout the rest of the Big Ten season. So they may have a chance of sneaking an at-large bid, but then it may be a first-round exit to like a Boise State or like a group of 5 team. So moving on, Notre Dame, massive loss to NIU. I wouldn't say I'm too concerned post, like in a reaction. I'm not going to overreact and say Notre Dame season's doomed. It's not. Notre Dame is fine. They don't have an overly hard schedule remaining for the rest of the year. They don't have to play Clemson, and so really, I think their biggest games left are at home against Louisville and at USC, and so they have the ability to be able to recover. I think they'll win at least one of those games. So you're looking at a 10-2 season. I don't know if that's going to be good enough to get into the CFP, especially as an independent. You're not going to be able to have that possibility at a ACC championship or like a Big Ten championship, where some of these other possible two-loss teams, if Oregon ends up with 2 losses, I doubt Ohio State will have 2 losses, but if they were able to squeeze into the Big Ten championship where they could get that automatic bid. This isn't the first time Notre Dame has lost to a group of 5 team under the Marcus Freeman era. They lost back at home to Marshall back in 2022, which was a massive shocker. That kind of, again, that I wouldn't say sounded the alarm, but it was a rude awakening for Irish fans. So again, if you're in South Bend, there's no major reason for concern. You've got a decent schedule. You've got a decently easy schedule going forward. I would say if you're trying to get into the CFP, you're going to need both of those wins to kind of get a guaranteed spot. But then again, NIU, they came out and, they they dominated the Notre Dame defense. They outgained Notre Dame by 100 yards. Notre Dame on third downs was 3 of 10, and NIU controlled the time of possession battle. NIU had 9 more minutes of possession than Notre Dame did. And so overall, what we saw in week 2 from Notre Dame was a drastic difference from what we saw when they went into Kyle Field, a very hostile crowd, first week of the season SEC, and they were able to beat A&M. So that was a huge win. That was I mean, had they lost that and then lost to NIU, I would say, hey, you may need to start sounding the alarm. You got to change up something going forward. But you beat A&M, you're fine. You got that under your belt. You lost a cupcake to NIU, but how you go forward and how you attack this Louisville game here in a couple weeks and SC at the end of the season over that Thanksgiving break timeline, that will really define the rest of your season. Boise State really gave Oregon a run for their money. Oregon, from what we saw in week one, wasn't the strongest performance. It was rather surprising, struggling with, I believe it's the only team to ever voluntarily drop from FBS to FCS in Idaho. And so Idaho, kept it close. I think it was a one-score game at the end. And yet again, Oregon winning by one score over Boise State on a last-second field goal. Oregon punted the ball 5 times in the first half. Last year, that's not something we really would have seen. And last year, there was just such a expectation of excellence in that Oregon offense with Bo Nix and how he was able to spread the ball around. He was able to open up the run game with, the way he was able to throw allowed for the entire offensive playbook to be able to be open. We haven't seen that from Dylan Gabriel. They still have those explosive plays every now and then, but this Oregon offense is nothing. I would say nothing compared to what it was last year. I think their defense has some major concerns, but their special teams is what saved them. And given, in order to be able to be a good national championship football team, you have to be able to have a good offense, a good defense, and a good special teams. And that special teams is really what saved Oregon from really a non-conference loss isn't going to kill them, but a non-conference loss is going to hurt. And so when you look at the way Boise State controlled that first half in Eugene, in what's considered one of the most hostile environments in the Big Ten now, I think there is cause for concern when a team like Ohio State is going to come in and I think they're going to be the best team in the Big Ten. They're going to come in, and if you play like you did against Boise State, Ohio State's going to boat race you. Ohio State might drop 50 piece on you, beat you by 30. So that's going to be a major concern. Dan Lanning has got to fix how this offense is going to work. He needs to find an identity and kind of stick with it. Do you want to go and kind of use the air attack to kind of like the West Coast offense, open up the run game a little bit, or like just figure out what you want? Moving forward, Oregon playing some of these stronger Power 5 teams. This weekend in Corvallis, they're playing Oregon State. They lost I believe they lost last year to DJ Uiagalelei, which is very interesting as what we've seen so far from Florida State. That has been terrible. But Oregon State this weekend, we'll get to picks later, but I think Oregon has a big cause to be on upset alert. After that game, though, I think it's pretty smooth sailing. I think they play Ohio State here in a couple weeks, I think mid-season, so they've got some time to kind of recover from this Oregon State game. But if you were to put money on it and you're looking for like a good value pick, definitely take Oregon State to cover. I wouldn't shy away from Oregon State money line either. Right now, I believe it's sitting around the plus 200 range, plus 220. Depending on what sports books you use, it's going to vary. But take a look at that and then kind of be like, hey, parlay that with the South Carolina win over LSU on Saturday. You could quadruple. You can make some good money. But I think if Oregon, if they win this weekend in Corvallis, there's a possibility for an 11-1 or 12-0 season. After this weekend, their 2 biggest games left versus Ohio State and then at Michigan. Michigan not, and we talked about this a couple minutes ago, Michigan not what we've seen so far as up to the standard of what it was last year. Ohio State, they've been pretty good. That could be their one loss. You never know. Moving on, back to SEC football. Arkansas. Wow. I mean, they have been unbelievable. And coming into the season, Sam Pittman was on the hot seat, went out, got new offensive coordinator and Rick Pitino, or I don't know how to pronounce Petrino, I believe is what his last name is. And I don't know what they cooked in the waters in the food in Fayetteville, but it's working. Taylor Green on Saturday went 26 of 45 for 416 yards and rushed for 61 yards as well. They had 648 total yards of offense against what was considered a good Oklahoma State team. And so this is giving us the question of, is Arkansas legit? 2 years ago, back in the 2022 season, Arkansas, I believe, was 10-2, if I'm not mistaken. They were ranked for a good portion of the season and then kind of fell off last year. They were terrible last year. Got a couple of good transfers in. Pittman really, I think, was able to kind of figure out an identity for this offense. And the way he's been able to work with Taylor Green and get Taylor Green to be able to not only throw the ball efficiently but run it efficiently too. I mean, they in their game against Arkansas Pine Bluff was the first time, and I can't remember if it was the first time ever. It was the first time in like 78, 90 years, something around then, where a team went 10 of 10 on offensive possessions, scoring touchdowns. Given it's Arkansas Pine Bluff, we didn't know what we were going to be able to expect from this Arkansas team moving forward. But when we saw what they did on Saturday to Oklahoma State, I think it is safe to say that Arkansas may be a team to look out for, given they have a very hard schedule moving forward. I mean, they're playing at home against Texas A&M, at home against Tennessee, at home against LSU, at home against Ole Miss, at home against Texas, and then on the road at Missouri, given there's other games sprinkled in there. But I mean, that could be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That could be 6 guaranteed losses right there. Given that A&M game and the LSU game may be more of a toss-up than the other ones, but I just don't see Arkansas being able to beat Tennessee, especially after what Tennessee just did to NC State in Charlotte. And that was a defensive masterclass by the Vols. And Nico Iamaleava and what he did on offense, just picking apart an ACC defense that was regarded as one of the top 2 or 3 in the conference there. Incredible. But again, so they had 687 yards of total offense against Pine Bluff and 648 yards against Oklahoma State for that Arkansas offense. That may be one of the greatest 2-game stretches I think I've seen, or at least I can remember in recent memory. I mean, that's crazy. And the efficiency at which they are going. I think they scored on half of their drives against Oklahoma State, which, again, not the greatest, but still, compared to what it was last year and entering the season this year, the expectations were low. And I think they so far have far exceeded them, especially with the fireworks and big plays they've been able to get off. That's not been a characteristic of Arkansas teams of the past couple of years, but they finally have that explosive, that firepower to be able to either break off a 40, 50-yard run, whether it's the quarterback in Taylor Green or the running back. But then they also have the ability to go and throw over your head for 40, 50 yards in a single play. Given it went to overtime, but they did dominate the time of possession battle against Oklahoma State. They also held on to the ball for more than 36 minutes, which is, I mean, when you look at it, it's usually split closer down the middle. We've seen a couple of times this past week where the time of possession battle, especially that NIU game where NIU held on to the ball 9 more minutes than Notre Dame, that can lead to a very big difference in the outcome of the game. Given Arkansas ended up losing in double overtime, still something to kind of look at and move as they move forward, especially in some of these bigger games. How does Arkansas control the clock? And with their offensive efficiency, are they able to not only chew up clock, but make possessions count? When you get into a game versus Tennessee, versus Ole Miss, and especially Texas, I don't think they'll be able to get Texas to run for their money. but can you go and score 3 or 4 touchdowns against them on 6 or 7 total drives? Given you're going to eat up the clock and your defense is going to have to keep Texas in a short field, get off the field on third downs, kind of do what NIU did to Notre Dame, force Notre Dame 3 and outs, get off the field on third downs, and NIU was able to stop them 7 times on third down. That's incredible. And so I think Arkansas moving forward, their defense, I think, is going to be what leads them to victory, even with as good as their offense is. But it's going to be how can their defense get the ball back to the offense so the offense can just chew time off the clock. And that's something that you see that the service guidance do very well is, hey, Navy will hold on to the ball for an entire quarter. You may not see, after the first quarter, you may not see the ball the rest of the half. That's just something that with very limited passing and the 2-3 yards here, 2-3 yards there. Oh, there's a 6-yard run, first down, and just the ability to chew off the clock. Arkansas, I think they're going to have to kind of adapt that play style where it's just grind the clock away. And I think that if you're able to do that efficiently and keep the ball out of the hands of Quinn Ewers, Jackson Dart, Garrett Nussmeier, Nico Iamaleava, then you may have a chance, a puncher's shot at upsetting 2, maybe 3 of those teams and making it to a bowl game this year. Given if you win all your other games besides, I mean, you could lose to A&M. Actually, you already have one loss now, so you'd have to win at least one of those games against A&M, Tennessee, LSU, Ole Miss, or Texas, or Missouri. So I wouldn't say it's grim moving forward, but I think there's definitely improvement in Fayetteville, and there's a lot to look forward to next season and beyond. I think if you're the Arkansas Athletics Department, you keep Sam Pittman around, seeing what this offense has been able to do. It'll be very telling what we see after the Tennessee game, after the LSU game. Hey, are they still putting up 600-yard games against top SEC defenses? If so, that definitely something to look at and monitor if you're kind of looking at new contracts or looking at letting Sam Pittman go. Personally, my favorite game of the weekend, no bias at all, completely not biased because I'm not a student at the University of South Carolina whatsoever. South Carolina trounced Kentucky in Kentucky. I don't know what Kentucky was thinking. Their offense was terrible. Brock Vandegrift played abysmally. And when you look at South Carolina going into the game, they had 288 yards of offense against ODU at home in what seemed like a lot rougher of a game than it actually was. That ODU game seemed as rough as it was because the lack of scoring. South Carolina had this past game, South Carolina put up 31 points against a decent Kentucky defense with 252 yards of offense. So they were able to do it with less offense, given Nick Eamon-Ward had a pick 6 at the end of the fourth quarter. But when you look at it, Lenore Sellers in game 1, extremely nervous. It was very kind of visible. I mean, he was getting frustrated with himself. He was missing these short dump-off throws. When kind of call back to entering the season, I said he looked like Joe Milton, where he was able to make those throws. He did not look like himself. Didn't really have any down the field shots that he really hit on. Given that game 1, there were a lot of shots down the field where he would get it into the receiver's hands and the receivers would drop it. I wouldn't say it wasn't completely his fault at all. I think it was all around just a poor team performance, but a way to bounce back in what they did. Dylan Stewart might be one of the best true freshmen we've seen here at South Carolina in a very, very long time. In fact, I think he might be one of the best true freshmen in the country this year, along with the receiver. I can't remember the receiver at Alabama's name, and I believe there's one at Ohio State that is also Ryan Williams might be his name at Alabama, but I believe Ohio State has one as well on offense. But Dylan Stewart so far has been unbelievable. especially as a true freshman coming in. He's got uh, through 2 games, he has 2.5 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, and 6 total tackles. That, I mean, for a true freshman, especially in his first SEC game against Kentucky, he played very well, had a ton of good pressures, was able to, given I think there are times where it won't show up on like the playbook stats, but like he was able to affect pressures. I mean, he was beating double and triple teams. I mean, he was able to leave his print on that Kentucky offense, and how when he was able to draw 2, 3 blockers, they were having to take blockers away from Kyle Kennard, who was also having a crazy season to start. He forced a fumble at the end of the ODU game to help get South Carolina that go-ahead touchdown. Gilbert Edmond and Tonka and TJ Sanders, a lot of these other guys that are very established defensive linemen are able to go and eat because Dylan Stewart is taking so much attention. And looking forward to this LSU game, if LSU is not, I mean, they have an All-American offensive lineman, blanking on the name, but if they're not able to kind of stop Dylan Stewart, they have to stop so much of this defensive line. And that defensive line, I think, is what's ultimately going to win for South Carolina coming into this week. But Kentucky, I think Kentucky needs to start sounding the alarm on their season. You just lost to South Carolina at home without scoring a touchdown. And you host number 1 Georgia this Saturday, tomorrow. And so I don't think there's any chance you win that if you play like you did last week. You're all around going to have to be significantly better, given I wouldn't bet on Kentucky to win that game. But then you're at Ole Miss. Again, you're going to have to play significantly better. I mean, you can't win games without scoring touchdowns, given we just saw the Steelers do it. But, I mean, you're not going to be able to do that in the SEC. You go and host Vanderbilt, go to Florida, you host Auburn, you go to Tennessee. You kind of get a little bit of a break with Murray State, but then you go to Texas and to Louisville. You very easily could end the season here with 3 or 4 wins. In a 4-8 season, 3-9 season under Mark Stoops could lead to Mark Stoops getting fired. There has been, I would say, kind of a lack of success recently, or vastly underperforming expectations, especially when you look at like these games against South Carolina. Last year, 17-14 in Williams-Brice Stadium, and then 2 years ago when Kentucky was ranked, I believe, 14 or 16 in the AP poll, you lost 24-14 at home. So Shane Beamer has owned Mark Stoops. He's 3-1 against Mark Stoops since becoming the head coach at South Carolina. And so there's just, if you're a Kentucky fan, I would be scared. This South Carolina game was one I would have had circled at the start of the season. Be like, hey, we need to win this. These games later in the season, like Vanderbilt and Florida, where they looked like certain wins at the start of the year, now look like, hey, especially the way Vanderbilt's been playing, that might be a loss now. Florida with DJ Lagway under center, that might be a loss now. And so it's going to be very hard for Kentucky moving forward to make a bowl. I think if they lose to Vanderbilt, their bowl hopes are done. I think because then going into the swamp, I don't think Kentucky wins in the swamp. That's going to be kind of Florida's break game. They have a rough schedule. But getting back to South Carolina, game day is here in Columbia this weekend. So I'm looking forward to being there. It's going to be an awesome experience. Game is at high noon on Saturday. It's going to be one of the first. It's going to be the best in the country this weekend. Our game of the week this weekend, I had the Civil War out in Corvallis. We'll get to our picks later for that. That's also going to be a great game. But South Carolina, if they want to upset Kentucky and kind of establish themselves as being easily one of the top 20 teams in the country, I'd say top 50. If they can beat LSU this weekend, I'd say South Carolina can squeeze into the top 15. You beat a decent Kentucky team, or what was appearing to be a decent Kentucky team in Kentucky, shutting their offense kind of out, shutting them down, and held them to 2 field goals. And so, if you want to go and upset Kentucky this weekend, my first key and the most important thing to be able to do this weekend, control the offensive line of scrimmage. Don't let their defensive line affect Lenore's Sellers. It's going to happen. Lenore's is going to get pressured. The more you minimize that and the more you let him get out of the pocket, create plays with his legs, get downfield, get Raheem Sanders to run, get him outside the numbers, let him break off 10, 20-yard runs. The more that happens, the more LSU is going to be forced to load the box, opens up the pass game, allows the North to take deep shots down the field, kind of take some of these under routes. And so when you look at that, I think if you can control the offensive line of scrimmage and you can control kind of how LSU is forced to play defense, whether or not they leave 5, 6 back as opposed to kind of having to load the box. Because if you can't establish that line of scrimmage and you're only letting LSU rush 3 or 4, then I don't think South Carolina is going to have much success on offense. Because if you're not able to run the ball, I don't think this South Carolina offense can be reliant on Lenore Sellers to be able to strictly throw. This offense is very heavily reliant on play action, kind of these little quick dump out screens, these slants on the inside, and then allowing that to open up the rest of the playbook down the field. My second key is contain the LSU pass game. Garrett Nussmeier has been decent so far this season, given the SoCal defensive line I don't think was as good as I was expecting it to be. He had, I think, 300-something yards against SoCal. But when you look at LSU, Garrett Nussmeier has been able to just throw the ball all over the place. Nussmeier had 308 yards against SoCal. And last week, they played Nicholls State, not really a decent team, but that game was a lot closer than it should have been. There were two garbage time touchdowns there at the end, but it was 30-21 there at one point in the fourth. It was 30. It was 23-21 kind of early in the third. So given if you're letting these FCS teams hang around, how can you expect to go and play, especially coming into Williams-Brice? How can you expect to compete with a South Carolina team, given we don't know if it's going to be the South Carolina team that showed up to play ODU or if it's going to be the South Carolina team that showed up to Lexington, Kentucky, and beat the crap out of the Wildcats. So if they can contain Nussmeier, have Dylan Stewart get to him, affect his pass, kind of get him uneasy, get some of these other defensive linemen involved, get Debo Williams going. If you can hold Garrett Nussmeier to 250 yards or less, I think South Carolina can win the game. And then lastly, keep the crowd in it. If you can keep everyone in Williams-Brice Stadium rowdy and get that place rocking the entire 4 quarters, I think it's going to be hard for LSU to stay in it. Because I feel like that just takes the air out of an opposing player. It adds to the nerves, it adds to the mistakes, kind of the mental miscues, the false starts, and everything. I mean, you see it during the Penn State whiteout, and so it's that kind of environment. And being a student here, we saw there were 20,000 student ticket requests for this game. So, and that there is no doubt, and the stadium sold out on Monday. So there's going to be 80,000 people here rocking and getting crazy. So South Carolina's got to keep all 80,000 of them in it and ready to go. And so moving to our college football picks for this weekend. Firstly, I've got South Carolina upsetting LSU. I think that this defense will be able to get it done. I think Lenore's will be able to spread the ball around. I think Rocket's going to have a big day. I think Rocket's going to rush for about 80 yards. So if you want to sprinkle in some money there, feel free. Bama going into Camp Randall. I think they're going to be able to cover that -16 line. What we saw last week, I think, was similar to what we saw last year with that USF game, and kind of how they woke up after. After that USF game, they woke up and just went on a tear. I think it's going to be a similar thing. I think this Bama team had some sense knocked into them kind of late there in the fourth quarter and realized that they were Alabama. I think that's going to carry right into Wisconsin. I think Bama ultimately is going to end up winning by 20 plus. So that's pick two. So we got South Carolina money line, Bama to cover 16 against Wisconsin. Arizona versus Kansas State. That's an early game on Friday. I've got the over 60.5. I think it's going to be a very high octane game offense wise. I think it's just going to be back and forth. I wouldn't say a lack of defense, but just the offense just battling it out against each other. Big stretch plays, kind of being able to spread out the offense. Oregon State money line versus Oregon. That is our game of the week this week in Corvallis. The Civil War being reunited. It's a bummer that it's not in October, or not October, but Thanksgiving in November. But it is what it is. Conference realignment affecting it. But I think that with the way Oregon has played so far this year, and Oregon State's been able to win somewhat convincingly against who they've played so far. So don't shy away from Oregon State money line. I think that's going to be one of the bigger upsets of the weekend. Georgia and Kentucky, I've got under 45. I don't think Kentucky's going to score a touchdown this weekend. I think Georgia's going to put up 35, 40 points. So I think that scoring is primarily going to be Georgia. Texas State money line versus Arizona State. That game came out, or that happened yesterday. The post for all the picks will come out on Thursday, though, so you can see all those. Boston College versus Missouri, over 53.5. Eli Drinkowitz knew where the line was last week with Buffalo and cashed the over. I have no doubt that he is going to, again, know where the line is again this time and hit the over. And then lastly, Kansas laying minus 7.5 against UNLV. Again, I think that's very low for what it could be. Kansas is on the up this year, given it's a home game with an asterisk. I think they're playing at the Kansas City Chiefs Stadium. So those are our picks for the week. Kind of moving forward to the NFL, we had week 1 last week. So I think our best way to break it down were biggest winners and losers from week 1 in the NFL. I think my biggest winner was Sam Darnold and the Minnesota Vikings as a whole. You drafted J.J. McCarthy, and I didn't think he was necessarily pro-ready to start. So I think I don't want to say him having an injury was a good thing, but I think for his overall development as a player in the NFL, I think he will be able to develop better and have a longer-lasting NFL career with that injury and him being forced to kind of go through the motions a little bit more before getting his first game reps in the NFL. Darnold proved, hey, he's not bad. He's still here. He's still in the NFL. He's still here to play. He went 19 of 24 for 208 yards and 2 total touchdowns with 1 interception. And he basically came out and said, hey, he's here to hold down the fort while McCarthy is injured. I believe it was season ending. I think it was something wrong with an Achilles or an ACL. So not sure if Minnesota will be able to make the playoffs off of this, but they were able to beat a Giants team that looked abysmal. The Cowboys. The Cowboys are my second winners of the week, I guess, if you want to do this kind of as the NHL did it, 3 stars. Cowboys a second star. Good early season win on the road. There were a lot of questions coming in of, hey, what are the Cowboys going to be this year? You had all the talks about the contracts in the offseason. Hey, they're not going to be able to play well with all this distractions going on. And they came out and silenced that. The Browns, who were a good playoff team last year, given a lot, I think a lot of that was to Joe Flacco doing what Joe Flacco does. But Deshaun Watson looked terrible. And it very well could be a long season for the folks in Cincinnati, or not Cincinnati, Cleveland, Cincinnati as well. But, I mean, just the turnovers and the decision-making from Deshaun Watson were not what you would expect from a $208 million $280 million quarterback. And then my third star of the week, Gerard Mayo. filling in the shoes of a guy who won 6 Super Bowls in New England is not easy. Um, New England last year was abysmal in the last year of the Belichick era, and it was certainly not looking up, and especially as they went into a Cincinnati team that was, I wouldn't say bad last year, but with the Joe Burrow injury, they certainly didn't live up to the expectations. Given Joe Burrow being hurt, he was a big part of those expectations being where they were. And they controlled the time of possession, and the offense was able to efficiently run with Jacoby Brissett under center. They decided to sit Luke or Drake May, and with the veteran quarterback again, another Jets draft pick that came out and proved like that won a big game in week 1. And so Gerard Mayo, kudos to him for being able to work in the off season this year and go and kind of, I would say it was a massive upset in Cincy. So not one that a lot of people had. And I think it ruined a lot of different people's parlays for this past weekend. Get into the losers on the flip side. Bryce Young, terrible week 1 game. First pass from scrimmage for the Panthers picked off. And the defense all around was terrible. They gave up a 59-yard pass or 59-yard receiving touchdown from Rashid Shaheed on the 5th play of the game. And so if that's going to be the tell or the kind of how the season is going to go for the Panthers, it's going to be a rough one in Charlotte. And I think that they're going to have trouble selling tickets. It's going to be bad. I may be able to squeeze up there that Saints game in week 8. Hopefully Rattler is starting by then. I would love to see him play. But if the Saints are playing well, keep Carr under center. But Carr, again, tore apart that Panthers defense. He had 200 yards with 3 TDs, and the Panthers defense gave up 379 total yards of offense. Kamara had a couple touchdowns in the second half. So, again, not a good week for Carolina fans, not a good week for Bryce Young or that Carolina defense, just all around a bad loss. Second kind of, I wouldn't say loser of the week, but Falcons fans. Kirk Cousins looked terrible. And for a guy that you paid all that money to come in and play as bad as he did, you lost to a Pittsburgh team that didn't score a touchdown. They kicked 6 field goals and won the game. The Falcons struggled to hold on to the ball and not turn it over. I think Cousins had 2 interceptions, and there was a fumble in there. And so it may not be a very long time before you see Michael Penix starting. While I don't want him to be thrust into the position, I think, coming out of the draft was the most pro-ready quarterback. Him and Spencer Rattler both were, I think, the most pro-ready quarterbacks coming out. They had both established careers in college, kind of stayed 4 or 5 years. So Bo Nix is also in that category. He should have a great time in Denver. And last loser of the week was the NFL in Brazil. And don't get me wrong, that game was incredible. From start to finish, extremely entertaining. Lots of big plays, lots of massive touchdown throws from Jalen Hurts and Jordan Love. Extremely sad to see Jordan Love go down there at the end. What hopefully is he's only out for 4 to 5 weeks with that high ankle sprain. But you could see the field conditions there were terrible. And for what you would expect being the first game in Brazil, you would think that and especially the place that they play soccer, grass consistently should be decent for that. But I mean, players were slipping. I think it was affecting the game. You would see more times than not receivers trying to come back to the ball, which should be able to easily happen. And what we see over the course of an NFL game, players trying to come back and slipping, kind of falling, not being able to get a firm grip with the ground. And so I think that the NFL really should have done better. And the same thing with the Super Bowl. I don't think it was this past year, maybe 2 years ago, where players were having trouble with cleats interacting with the turf in Arizona. Turf being the grass that they have there, but still, I think they needed to do better. There should have been better quality checks going in, and should have just used better grass overall. And so there were some major questions that we saw that arose from week one. I think one of the biggest was, did we get an AFC Championship preview in Ravens Chiefs? That was another very entertaining game. Came down to the wire. In fact, it was a last second touchdown call that was overturned for Isaiah Likely. And so, given we saw the start of that game, and at the start of that game, there were, I think, 4 times the Ravens were called for not lining up properly on the offensive line with how they changed the rule, where the helmet needs, I believe the helmet needs to be lined up inside the belt line of the center for the rest of the offensive line. And I feel like the refs were not calling that game squarely for that, as Jawan, I believe his name is Jawan Taylor, the right tackle for the Chiefs, numerous times jumping off sides, lined up nowhere close to that belt line. And so I feel like if you're going to call that, and especially with the NFL making an emphasis on that, then you need to call that both ways for both teams, even if it's Patrick Mahomes. But can anyone in the AFC compete with either the Ravens or the Chiefs? I think no. I think this new look offense, you saw Lamar Jackson be able to command a lot more, be able to change plays based on the looks of the defense. With Derrick Henry, even though it's not going to be the Derrick Henry we've seen when he played with the Titans, where you just hand the ball to him and he just runs it every play, we are going to see Derrick Henry play a crucial role in this offense. He's a good guy to get consistently 3, 4, 5 yards, especially when needed. There's still like the Derrick Henry we saw of old, where just no one could tackle him. Given there were a couple of times in the backfield, he just ran into the brick wall that was the Chiefs' defensive line. And so, moving forward, I think the best team to be able to compete with them, and even then, I think it's the Ravens, Chiefs, in that upper echelon of the AFC. And then step below, you got the Dolphins, the Bills. I don't think the Jets are quite up there yet. I'd need to see them make the playoffs first before I even put them anywhere near there. But after that, the way the Bengals played in week one and how, I wouldn't even say how good that division is, because the Steelers looked rough, not being able to score a touchdown, even though Justin Fields, I'd say, played better than what people were expecting him to. Browns looked terrible. And so really, it's just Bengals and Ravens might be the only AFC North teams to make it to the playoffs this year. As of, I think last year they had 3 between the Ravens. Actually, I think it may have been all of them. I'm not entirely sure. Don't quote me on that. But moving forward, Caleb Williams, the number 1 pick in the NFL draft, so highly touted, and yet I don't want to say I called it, because it's just one game, but he looked abysmal. I don't think that he kind of, and given it's his first game in the NFL, I don't think he really adjusted well to what the NFL is going to do and what he can and cannot get away with. He went 14 of 29 for 93 yards. There were numerous times where he would try and scramble out of the pocket and run backwards and try and dilly-dally and juke and whatnot, and would get sacked for 15 and 20-yard losses. And so that's just not something that you're going to be able to get away with in the NFL, especially with needing to fight for every yard. And you're now having to go and have 2nd and 20, 3rd and 30, where those aren't going to be easy to be able to come back from. The Bears somehow won that game without scoring an offensive touchdown, which kudos to them. It was the Titans, but for that offense being as many weapons as they went out and got Keenan Allen, Rome Odunze, upgraded the running back room. There are so many offensive weapons, and yet we saw such little offensive production coming from there. The Bears have an easy schedule this year, but I don't know if they're going to be able to go and compete with the Lions or the Packers for the NFC North. Given with the way the Vikings played, they may be fighting with the Vikings for last place in the NFC North. I don't think they're going to be able to come close to Green Bay. I don't think they're going to be able to come close to Detroit. I don't think with the way that offense played, And you take that and you put Aiden Hutchinson up against them. You put that Detroit Lions defense that almost sold the game against LA. It was a much better LA team than what the Titans are. And so there's too many questions that were left unanswered. There's too many kind of what are you doing moments from this Bears offense. And so I don't think it would be wise to. I don't want to say it's not going to be wise, but Caleb Williams needs to be better moving forward. Given I think the expectations for him were too high. They're coming in saying he's a generational quarterback. I mean, there have been a lot of generational quarterbacks coming into the NFL out of college. I mean, just look at what Johnny Manziel was. Great college, all-time great college quarterback. Just did not translate well to the NFL. I'm not saying that Caleb Williams is necessarily going to be a bust yet, but if he continues to play the way he did and continues to not learn from his mistakes, and I think just it's going to be rough for him to adapt, especially in a division that's as tough and defensively strong as it is. The next, and I think the last big question that arose from week one was, will Dallas be able to make it through the first round of the NFC playoffs? And after watching the performance that we saw from America's team, Dallas fans may be thinking it might finally be their year. Given Cleveland, I think the Cleveland we saw Sunday was not the Cleveland we saw last year. I think they're two complete different teams, two complete different offensive makeups when you have Deshaun Watson at quarterback and when you have Joe Flacco at quarterback. I think two complete different guys. And I think Joe Flacco is still a very viable option. I believe he's in Indy now, backing up Anthony Richardson. Not a bad move at all for the Colts. Kind of get a veteran guy established in there to help grow and develop Anthony Richardson, who I think is going to be a fantastic quarterback moving forward. But you have the Saints coming into Dallas this week. And that Saints had a great day. They're able to work out all the kinks on offense. So how is this Dallas defense going to be able to go and try and stop or stifle an offense that is running on all cylinders right now? Given it was a Carolina defense, but you let Alvin Kamara get warm. You let him break off a couple big runs. You're then going to have to turn your attention away from Rashid Shaheed and Chris Olave, who could burn you downfield. So I think the Saints Dallas game is going to be the game of the week this week in the NFL. Given there's also the Buffalo Miami game on last night. I'm recording this Thursday, so that will be later tonight. Again, picks will be out beforehand. So I think it'll be a tell. If the Saints can go into Dallas and beat Dallas, I don't think Dallas is going to be able to make it through the first round of the playoffs, given I think if they were going to make it to the playoffs, they're fighting for that wild card. But I don't think they improved enough in what we saw from last year. I don't think they went out and got enough and upgraded enough. And they spent too much money with these contract extensions that we were all talking about in the offseason. And so it's just, I think they tied up too much money there to be able to go and get the ancillary pieces around them. So it'll be interesting to see how these play out. And so, given now, as we kind of wrap up this week, NFL picks for the week. Game of the week, Saints and Cowboys. I got under 46.5. While I think the Saints offense will be able to do more than the Dallas offense, I think CeeDee Lamb's going to be able to go for a touchdown or two. But I think the Saints offense is going to be able to put up 28, 30 points. And so I don't know if the Dallas offense is going to be able to keep up with it. But both these defenses, again, very strong defenses. And so I think it's safe to say under 46 is going to work. I think the last time these two teams played, again, I think the last couple times these two teams played have been fairly low scoring. So with the Saints adding Chase Young on that defensive line and how that defense looked against Carolina, again, Carolina, what we saw from them, I think was enough to make me think, hey, I tend to lean towards the under. Jets money line versus Titans. After the Titans losing to a team that didn't score an offensive touchdown, I think it's going to be hard for me to bet against Aaron Rodgers coming off of a loss week 1 to the 49ers and what was I wouldn't say a close game, but it wasn't the worst it could have been. I think the bar was not too high. I think the not to be like mean, but it was like if Aaron Rodgers is able to stay healthy through that first full game back, I mean, he hadn't played in pretty much 2 years. So if he was able to just come back and run the offense efficiently, which he did, the offense looked great. It was just they had problems converting. There were just a couple of miscues that kind of cost them big. And so I think they'll be able to bounce back well against the Titans. So Jets money line versus Titans. Give me Buffalo money line versus Miami. Miami historically under Tua has not done well against Josh Allen. I think Josh Allen's 3-1 against Tua in the past four. I think it was 4 seasons. Or last 4 meetings were 3-1. I think even further back. I think Buffalo's got more under their belt. So, and the way they looked week 1 against Arizona, this Arizona team looked better than what they had been previously, given there were a couple of defensive questions for Buffalo and how I don't want to say they gave up late, but they were struggling to stop the ball late. But give me Buffalo money line against Miami, time to recover, and Jacksonville money line versus Cleveland. I don't think this Cleveland team is going to be able to fix the amount of problems they had week 1. I think David Njoku, last I checked, he was out for this weekend. I think he's a big part of what their offense was last year. And so you take away one of those massive pieces, I just don't think there's enough there to help beat Trevor Lawrence and Calvin Ridley in Jacksonville. San Fran to cover -6 against Minnesota. I think I saw enough from Brock Purdy and Deebo Samuel and the rest of the 49ers week 1. Ricky Pearsall still out. It was incredible to see him on the field a week after getting shot in the chest. So thoughts and prayers still to him on his recovery. But San Fran to cover -6 against Minnesota. Tampa to cover +7.5 against Detroit. I think that line is crazy high. And by high, I mean, I don't know why Detroit is favored by 7.5. They're both crazy good teams right now. I think Tampa's offense with their air raid attack is going to be able to kind of pick apart this Detroit defense a little bit more than what people are thinking. I would even take Tampa money line, but with the way that the 7.5 is, like the 7.5 is more guaranteed than what the money line would be. And lastly, give me Green Bay money line in over Indy, battle between Jordan Love and Anthony Richardson. I think Jordan Love's going to be able to claim this first one. And then lastly, Kansas City -5.5 for Cincy. Again, with T. Higgins out, I just don't know if Cincinnati's got enough firepower on offense to be able to go and compete with what we saw from Patrick Mahomes and Xavier Worthy and the rest of that Kansas City offense in week 1 that looked great against a good Ravens defense. So, I mean, I would even, if they have the option, I would take Kansas City like -10. It's going to be a double-digit win for Kansas. So, thank you for tuning in this week. This will be the last week where it's just me. You listened to me ramble on for an hour about football. So if you're still here, you might as well subscribe because clearly you like the content. So thank you. Thank you for listening. I really appreciate it. It was a long summer. We were able to get through it. Football's finally back. We'll have hockey starting here shortly, so coverage will start to expand. We'll be able to move more towards a two episodes a week once we get Joey kind of back into the cycle, see how he's doing. I will see him tomorrow. I guess by the time you see this, I will have already seen him. So I'm really excited for that. Thank you for tuning in, and we will see you next week.